illuminating talk. We certainly will have some time for a question-answer session. Please identify yourself and be brief.
So, just one question.
Identify yourself.
My name is Bhaskar. Just one question. One of the things which has fascinated me about education in China is that if you look at education in China and India, the Indian school of education was the Gurukul system, meant for the Brahmins, meant for sons of princes. The Guru, when he got enlightenment, left society, went back to the hills, went back to the forest, was not committed to social development. The concept of mass education began with the Buddhists and with the Jains. Was Confucius influenced by Buddhism in terms of mass education, or was it vice versa?
Yeah.
Are you asking all the questions now?
You want to take a couple of questions together?
Yeah.
Or one by one?
You take several, then we can.
Okay, I'm Suketu Shah here. I have actually two questions. One is that where and how did the concept of the Middle Kingdom come about? Because as we know, the Chinese thinking, was it confusion? And if so, what does it really mean in geopolitical terms? Because you have the heaven above, you have the Middle Kingdom, and then you have everybody else. So how does it translate itself into China's thinking of its view of the world? Because you analyze brilliantly about China's internal thinking vis-a-vis itself. But what about its relations with the rest of the world? And the second question was, I read the column that Sudhin had written about Wen Jiabao and how we have a very strong supporter there for the kind of relations that you envisage between India and China, the 0.01% deficit, and to remove that. The question is, how deep is this thinking? I got a sense of real urgency from your article that it's really, this is an opportunity because there may not be others who actually share the vision of a Wen Jiabao. And if it's not so deep, or how deep is it, is the question.
Just please identify yourself and please be
Sir,
brief.
my name is Vincent. Sir, Confucius removed confusion and dropped complexity. Gandhi removed dirt and brought about smell, right smell. So my question is, how did the Chinese address women issues and women's education? Because if a woman is educated, will bring about education in the whole society. And so how did they take action on wrongdoers in search deals and the audit? How did they bring about audit? So that's my question. Thank you.
Sir, my name is Dr. Rajesh.
Shall I cover this? These three?
Let me cover these and then.
One single question. What are the factors which, Dr. Rajesh, what are the factors which prevented China to collapse like Russia? Russian democracy collapsed, communist democracy, and China is still running very successfully. What are the factors which prevented China from collapsing?
Okay, let me, very interesting but quite challenging set of questions. Firstly, Mr. Bhaskar's question on the Guru system and education. Confucius' basic thought was actually that the harmony in society could not come about unless there was what he called self-cultivation of people, and that is improvement in their awareness of themselves and others. And that could happen only through education. Education, not just book learning, but education of life. And that would not happen if it were confined to the nobles or the aristocrats, because they were only a small number. The rest would be running wild in this Hobbesian kind of way. Hence, he came to the conclusion that mass education was very important. In the kind of system that we had, there was also a question of the Gurus gaining enlightenment for themselves and then also going on to kind of spread that enlightenment in a different way. But first you got enlightened and then you spread that enlightenment. And of course many people didn't get enlightenment and pretended that they got it. Some of them around here nowadays too.
There are many.
But the interesting thing is that Confucius, by a small margin, I think 50 years or so, predated Buddhism. So Buddha came after him. Now Suketu's question on the Middle Kingdom is very interesting. All the Chinese terminology of the Middle Kingdom and all under heaven, the concept of all under heaven, which embraces the whole world, there is a kind of system of relationships between China and the outside world, which is very much like the Confucian system of family relationships that you have in the Confucian system. Is historically 5 relationships, that is the father, son, the brothers, husband, wife, friends, and citizen and government. These were the 5 relationships which had to be kept in harmony. And beyond those, the rest of the relationships were kind of slightly tenuous. These were the key. In similar fashion, the Chinese conducted their sort of diplomacy in kind of concentric circles, in fact in rectangles, because the Chinese maps of the world are rectangular, not circular to start with. And so you had the Central Empire, then you had what were known as the allied barbarians, and then you had the outer barbarians, and then you had folk who were simply barbarians. And barbarian did not mean wild as the word implies. It is wrong translation of the word. It really means not cultivated in the Chinese sense. So I mean, it is not not the term that we mean by barbarian. So it's a misunderstanding of the rest of the world. But the important thing is, it was not a relationship of superior inferior. They were just different. They were just people who were different. And interestingly enough, the very first time and the only time Chinese fleets went to a significant part of the world in the Ming Dynasty, 1421, it was not one of imperial expansion. It was one of trade, one of actually it was a symbolic fitting of these things into the cosmic harmony and bringing of tribute and all that kind of thing. It was more symbolic, but it was not imperial expansion. So it's quite interesting, and therefore Chinese